Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of the Corona Spotlight 2020. I am your host, Gayle Nicholson. I am so happy to see you back with us once again today. Today, my guest is somebody that I just recently started to get to know a little bit better, and I am so happy that I did. Many of the things that she talks about and the ways that she helps healing people are ways that I'm very interested in, and I hope that you are as well, because we're going to go and talk to her about those now. So please help me welcome Molly Wavra, the Spiral Path Wellness Practitioner, also known as Spiral Path Woman. Thank you so much for being with us today, Molly. I appreciate it. Glad you're
Thank you
here.
for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, I love what you're doing with living the spiral path. Let's just start with tell me a little bit more about that so our listeners have an idea of what that is all about.
Well, in terms of the name or the presence that it has like on Facebook and whatnot, it's been an evolution. I have been in worked in wellness and holistic health, nutrition, fitness, movement for over 20 years, and I just had the page on. I really, in 2012, like many, I think that we know, my whole life kind of started deconstructing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I officially decided to have my own business in 2013 and start trying to create just a presence, a professional, another appropriate words, brand. So that kind of started. It started with it's called Whole Way Wellness, and so it's just kind of taken on that. The spiral itself is a totem that, and a symbol that's it's pretty primordial, but it
Mm-hmm.
presented itself to me in a ceremony in my early 20s, and so it's significant to me in many ways. So.
Awesome. So that led to you adopting it for your company name, correct?
And yeah, and it continues to be in alignment with who I am and what I do, and um, it yeah, it's just aligned.
Well, let's lead on with that. What? Tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do. You've got so many tools at your disposal. Um, what do you claim as your most primary?
I just one thing I want to back up and to say is thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, because one of the challenges that I have as a practitioner is that I do have such a broad tool belt, and it when you look at like my resume or whatever, it seems eclectic, but it's really all the same thing. It's um, my entire life. So from early childhood, I was very intuitive, very much had a palpable relationship with what I now just call the unseen world, with the world of energy. And I was fortunate in that even though I was raised Catholic, my mother was very steeped in mysticism of the Catholic faith. And so she never made that weird.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my particular relationship with that capacity was really particularly honed on the body. So, like as a kid, like my favorite book. Remember those old encyclopedias with the
Mm-hmm.
transparencies for all the different body systems?
Oh
I don't know if
wow!
you
Yeah,
remember, like
yeah.
where like you had the body and then all the overlays for like the nervous system and the musculars. I loved that. I've
Mm-hmm.
just so I've had an affinity for the physical body for a long time, and I used to draw these pictures, and my mom realized that I had a particular ability to see people's level of health for some reason.
Okay.
And I would draw these pictures, and she would try to. It became like anyway. So then she kind of went through her own new age awakening of sorts in my kind of formative years when I was like 11, 12, 13. And I remember the first time she brought home like it was like a pamphlet or something, and there was this graph showing the energy system, the chakra system, and we had called my drawings, my mom always called them my rainbow angels, because what I was drawing was the human energy field with the toroidal
Oh
and the,
my.
that's
I
what
just got chills. I
yeah.
full body chills.
So
Yeah.
that's what I had, yeah, that's what I had been relating with and drawing
Hmm.
from the time I was very, very little. So, my appreciation and just passion for the body and wellness, just was always there. So, and, I'm also human. I went through my own experiences. Kids, we start to close things down. So, but that really, that awareness was always there. And then I kind of, in my early 20s, I discovered the work of Carolyn Mace, who, I don't know if you know her work, but she's a medical intuitive.
I
And
do. One of my favorite little bits from her was, and I didn't follow a lot of her stuff, but one of my favorite bits from her was that for women, it's not that things suddenly bother us during that premenstrual time. It's just that we have a much lower tolerance for what we can deal with. So these things bother us the other 3 weeks of the month. We just blow them off. That fourth week, it's not so easy to blow them off anymore. So yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah. Please continue.
Well, yeah, and so I had just already, in my own seeking and my own ongoing desire to understand myself and my spirituality, and but her work, her first book that I read was Anatomy of the Spirit, and what it helped me just kind of make peace with was that I wasn't crazy, for one thing, and that it's just a capacity. Like I really think it's like, I don't think I'm special. I think I have a particularly developed capacity that anyone can actually cultivate.
If they've chosen not to shut it down as a child, like most of us tend
well,
to.
I was really fortunate to not, and I had an environment where it was allowed and encouraged. And I think that's kind of rare.
Yeah, I agree.
So I have, so even like, as I went into and I pursued, like, being a personal trainer, I went to school to study sports medicine. I had my daughter when I was quite young, so I took a break from school, but I was always wanting to work with the body. And I inherently knew the connection between the energetics. I didn't have a comfort talking to just anybody about that, because they think you think you're crazy. That movement was really starting to grow then, kind of the New Age movement, a lot more metaphysics and things like that were happening. So, but even going to work as a personal trainer, I knew what I knew. Like, I just would always get information from people about them, and you learn how to filter that. But to me, it was so practical. Like, to me, like, if it's as practical as helping my client get stronger biceps, to know where their energy leaks are and where things are stuck. And like, it's just information. It's not a belief system. It's just, it's the underpinnings of our physical body. So,
I agree 100%. It's science. Just because we don't have machinery fine-tuned enough to be able to measure it and quantify it the way that we love for science to be able to label things, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means there's a lot more for us to develop.
Well, and the science is, so to me, there's no separation. I love science. I don't think science, for me, there's no disparity between science and I've even kind of stopped using the word spirituality. To me, it's just consciousness. And I thank God for quantum physics, like, and that is
right.
Because Newtonian physics cannot measure and it's not the right type of science to explore a lot of this phenomena. It just isn't. It's reductionistic, which is not how the world works. So.
Agreed. Yeah. We could go off on an hour conversation about that in
itself. Very much so.
You know what? I want to steal something from you because I want to put this on a T-shirt. Thank God for quantum physics.
And I don't pretend to be a quantum physicist, but I I'm the way my mind works and has always worked in terms of my academics. And, I have a lot of academic training in physiology and science, but my mind very quickly can grasp concepts, even if I'm not great at the nitty gritty and the quantifying. Like chemistry for me was this paradoxical nightmare. Like I totally got it. And like, don't make me do the math. It's just like, ah. So
I was kind of like that with algebra. I'm like, that's the answer. Well, show your work. I don't know how I got there. That's the answer. Well, you're right, but show your work. But I don't know how to do the work. That's the answer. That's all you need.
Exactly. So I consider myself a scientist because to me, science is a way of thinking, not a collection of absolutes. It's
right.
Science is a way of staying curious about everything. So that's my own with that. So that's kind of the, so I'm always, and I was voracious in my seeking to understand and to explore. And again, I stayed kind of in the safe space professionally for, of personal training. I have a degree in public health and in health promotion and health education. So I stayed in the realm of, personal fitness. I've worked in corporate wellness. So I've worked with, different pods. So, but I always carrying and holding the knowing of those underpinnings of how things work.
I love
and then
that.
It shifted.
Now,
everything
tell
shifted.
me, how did you shift into traumatic work? How did you come to start working with trauma? I mean, that's not the safe zone.
No, it's not. Well, but it's also, so in working with, like Carolyn Mason's work, what I just know that I know is that that we hold pain in the body, like trauma and unreleased, unintegrated emotional, mental pain that's not managed lives in the body. Like that's what disease is.
Right.
And so I already was steeped in that, and from just my own direct experience. And then I was trying to put the timeline on this the other day when I was kind of thinking of talking to you. So I guess it would have been in 2001. I went to a very intensive, like week-long personal growth retreat type thing. And in one of the sessions, there was this very, very gifted woman, and we were doing, inner work, and and I just simply said, I said, I can have empathy for everybody else. I said, but when I really get to a certain point, I said, I just hit this wall and I can't get in there. And she came and she put her hands on my back, and I just started getting flooded with a memory. So I started having a recall of a traumatic event that happened. I could only see to a certain point. And so I went home and I actually asked my mom, I'm like, did something happen? And I gave her what information I had, and she totally confirmed it. She totally confirmed that, yeah, well, this thing happened. We never knew what happened to you. Basically this neighbor kid, my brothers were supposed to be watching me, and we'd gone to a neighbor's house, and there was a young man staying there who everyone knew was troubled. And he had gotten me in a bathroom. That much of the memory came back. I was only like 5. So, and her version of the story was that, she, was off playing and all of a sudden got the urge to come check on me. And when she came, he must have heard her coming, and kept bringing me out of this bathroom. And I was just like, I was essentially catatonic for like 3 days, and they never could figure out, he never would cop to what he did. They took him to the doctor. There wasn't a mark on me, but I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't eat. I was just catatonic for like 3 days. So that was an interesting process. As that started me really, and I was able to work with it in a multitude of ways. I worked with the emotional pit, because that part I was able to work with, like just this fear, where's my mom? Why is no one, but I never could get to the actual event. And I didn't push it. I don't think that, I'm glad I wasn't working with it, because I think some therapists encourage the digging, which I don't think is a good idea.
I agree with you.
And so it just was there. And I was, my own spiritual journey, I firmly believe. So I had started doing work with Native American ceremonies and Lakota sweat lodges and things like that. And I absolutely believe that the years of doing that ceremonial work, doing sweat lodges, like literally burned away and melted away layers, and helped me get to a place in my nervous system where then the things could come back. So then in 2012, my mom passed away, and I was with her. I was at her bedside when she passed, and I had this, extremely profound experience, which could be, again, a whole other show. But her passing, and a lot of this recognition is in retrospect, all my capacities went through the roof after that. Like, you heard the word downloads, like just the amount of information energetically and coming at me was, some people would call it a kundalini, but I had already been dealing with all of this, but it was this quantum ratcheting up.
Wow. Yeah.
Of that. And I started seeing, I had found a somatic therapist and was working with that. And so within that next year, the full recall came back. And there were so many blessings in there of people that turned me. And during that time, I was turned toward Peter Levine's work on trauma.
Okay.
And the importance of the somatics, the body being part of the remembering, and how essential that is, which I already, again, wasn't aligned with my own history, my own experience. And so during that time, then the full recall, finally came back. And essentially this young man had gotten me in there. He had repeatedly asphyxiated me with a plastic bag.
That was what happened in the bathroom?
Yeah. So that full recall came back, and it was sounds weird to call it beauty, but this whole thing validated to me the perfection of our psyche and why our psyche protects us from certain things and all the ways that it will do that. So because by the time that I had that full recall, it was like, it wasn't re-traumatizing, which I think is essential to trauma work, is to not, which I think traditional talk therapy can do. It was almost like it was like this piece in this puzzle, and it just connected so many dots to help me understand. And so my mother, the thing that was key, and the reason I'm even going into the details of that, because I don't tell this story a lot. I'm making peace with that, because I think it's actually important that I start telling it. But the amazing thing was that my mother's death broke the spell in a way, because what had happened was, I think he would have killed me. I really do. I think he would have killed me.
I think you're right.
But he heard her coming. Remember, she had gotten this intuition to come check on me. And what came back in the recall was, as he's leading me out of the bathroom, he says, "If you say a word, I'll kill her." And so that was words or spells. And so, again, I could just go into all the ways that connected and fused this really bound relationship with my mother's health. And, just so many things that it brought together. And so when she passed, that released that he could no longer hurt her. Right?
Yeah. Now you're safe to say whatever you need to say.
That little girl could stop protecting her mom.
Yeah.
Wow. And so then I've since, obviously, still am in the process of, even though it wasn't re-traumatizing, there's a lot there. And I just became so determined to, and I always have been, to help people understand the vastness of trauma. Now, that's an acute, specific trauma. But And what I have found a lot in my work is people think, well, nothing ever bad really happened to me. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is something's happened to all of us, and especially when that happens in the first 7 years of life, it so deeply imprints our nervous system and our psyche with a program that those programs then run us to varying degrees of conscious, and to me, the importance of trauma work is gently and lovingly and including the infinite wisdom of the body into the excavation of things. And that doesn't even have to be a whole story. It doesn't matter. A lot of things happen to our little nervous systems when we're pre-verbal. You're never going to find that story.
Right.
You're never going to find that story in the mind,
right.
But it's in the body.
Yeah.
It's in the body. And so it's there to be met. Like I do not subscribe to the idea that the symptoms that arise from trauma need to be fixed or even cleared. They're to be met and held and integrated and
it's
acknowledged.
Interesting that you say that, because I was talking with somebody just last week, and it's like I'm still uncovering things that are a direct impact of what I experienced as a child. Mm-hmm. But there are some things that, I've cleared a lot and I've overcome a lot and blah, blah, blah. But there's some things that I keep.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that everything that came out of that is something to be gotten rid of.
No, I don't believe that at all.
Right? So it really becomes a matter of, is this something that I want to continue, or is this something that I choose to discontinue?
Mm-hmm. Right. Real quick, can you still see? You're froze on my screen. I just want to make sure that we're not having any tech issues.
Nope, we have no tech issues. It's fine.
Okay, great. No, I think there's so much to unpack around that, especially when you start looking at people really wanting to do this work. One of the most, it was a gift I got from a friend of mine, someone who became a dear friend of mine, he's a spiritual teacher in some ways. He's also a psychotherapist. And it was kind of during this time that I met him, and where I'm always trying to learn and unpack things. And he invited me to this idea that all of that trying to improve and find my potential and constantly trying to heal was actually very self-aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Really? Self-aggressive.
And that idea, it did something that it reoriented me, and really from a deep felt sense in my nervous system, I finally could embody genuine and deep self-compassion.
Nice.
And if I can do anything for my clients, is to bring them to that place, because when we are trying to get rid of something, even if it's a bad habit or whatever, we are rejecting a part of ourselves. And that energy creates friction between the unconscious, the subconscious, the conscious mind, and in the body. So to me, the goal is always, how can I hold this? How can I hold this? And yes, create a new relationship with it, so that I'm not, constantly staying in a loop that is keeping me stagnant and self-sabotaging. But how can I just recognize that my little body, my little nervous system did an amazing job of trying to protect me.
And your mother.
That's amazing. The fact that our psyche will split off apart and hold it over here until we're able to hold it. That to me is infinite wisdom. To me, that is the wisdom of these bodies, not just the physical body, the mental body, the energy body, the ethereal body. Like, there is just so much intelligence in these vessels.
In every single cell.
And so I look at the trauma. It's one of those words that I'm glad that it's coming so much into conscious awareness and collective awareness. I sometimes feel like it's one of those words that's losing its meaning, though, because it's being so overused, and it's being used that it breaks. Like I said, I've worked, it's interesting, over the last several years, more and more men come in to my client base, and they have extreme anxiety, but they don't give themselves permission because they don't have a story about something horrible happening to them, you know?
Yeah.
And we live in a traumatic world. Being born into the field of energy in this realm is inherently traumatic, right? Like and none of us had perfect caregivers. And so, yeah, I think we're all dealing with varying layers and degrees and unique responses to a very challenging world.
Agreed. So let's talk a little bit. I'm just enthralled in your story, and I'm just sitting over here just nodding away, because everything that you're saying has been my experience as well. You know, it's like one of those. You remember Mad Libs from growing up, right?
I still have them. I love them.
Right.
Yeah, you can still find them. I still buy them for my kids.
Yeah. But you could the same exact story, different nouns, different verbs, whatever, but it's the same story, and it is how the roller coaster ride of being a human being is designed. You know, we spend that pre-language up to age 7, just taking everything in, cataloging it, making decisions about life because of it, and then we spend the rest of our life proving ourselves right. And in the meantime, there's all of these little surprise packages along the way.
Well, and the other piece I'll add in there is that I think that part of my capacity to see came from that trauma in a way. Like I worked with a shamanic practitioner for a while to access where I went for those 3 days that I was catatonic. And to be with the experience of a near-death experience. And just even biochemically, what happens in the brain during an event like that, and the DMT release that happens near death. I really think that because that happened at such a young age, that's part of why, this is my own theory about it, it kind of like cauterized me open to those higher experiences.
And even sorry to interrupt you, but the pictures that you were drawing, were you drawing that before that experience, after that experience, or both?
That's a great question. I both. I think that they enhanced in their detail as I got after that experience. Gotcha. So, but yeah, no, it was always. I mean, my mom, just from the time I was little, I was like one of my earliest memories was of. It turned out to be one of my grandmother's funerals, and I was talking about the lady that was flying above the casket. And when I shared that with my mom, she was like, "Yeah, you were like 2," So it was just, like I said, I feel like I've just always had an antenna that was open to certain information. And then I had the opportunity to cultivate that. And I just think that trauma in general, because of just the physiology and the brain chemistry of trauma, often it does open people to these gifts of seeing and feelings, like the whole empath experience. I actually think is just unintegrated trauma, and energetic hypervigilance. That's my theory about.
Yeah, I have a bit of an add-on theory to that, as well as far as we all have the capacity for empathy, right? It's part of the human condition. But I find that people who have endured abuse as a lifestyle become more empathic, where they feel the energy of the room. They take on other energy in order, for like a self-preservation and safety technique, so to speak. But
but it's not really healthy. It's not healthy. Actually, it's unboundaried. It's a survival mechanism. If you fuse with your environment and you stay hypervigilant to it, again, it's just chronic hypervigilance, and it fries the nervous system and the body.
Exactly. So. Now, I want to kind of shift a little bit and talk a little bit about the current trauma that is
Mhm.
happening to the
Yeah.
world. Because, as we're talking about this, there
Mhm.
are, children under the age of 7 that are experiencing, you know, not being able to go to first grade for months. School is canceled,
Yep.
little kids
Yep.
that they're going to have 2, 3 months of everybody in the family being in the house all the time. And then
Yeah.
once this is over and we start going back out and stuff, then it's going to be like, well, this is weird. There's
Yeah.
so can you tell me a little bit between, like the individual trauma like you and I experienced?
Mhm.
How is that separate or different, and what to look for than the collective trauma that we're experiencing worldwide in many
Mhm.
different ways? Whether
Right.
it's, stay in place orders, or,
Mhm.
whatever the case may be locally to you. Um,
Mhm.
this is a worldwide trauma. This is,
Yeah, absolutely.
forced
It absolutely
confinement
is.
to a certain extent, whether
Mhm.
you're voluntarily complying or not.
Mhm.
So
And
what are your
and it's
thoughts?
and it's a trauma that's like full of gaslighting. So there's that. Um
Yeah.
and I mean that like existentially. Like so I have lots to say about this. So one thing I would back up and say is that I think that trauma and the symptoms that arise from trauma are, I call them doorways when I'm working with people, is that there's wisdom. There's always wisdom in pain. And
Mm-hmm.
in the Western mindset, we tend to pathologize everything and we want to make it go away because it's bad. And it's not. If you don't go to the root of something, there's wisdom there, right? So first of all, I would say that about trauma. I think it's an opportunity to heal and to work specifically with specific types of healing. Um, there is absolutely individual trauma going on. Like, so for the first like 2 weeks of this, and I know many people have had intense dreams, but what came up for me, again, some of this is just because my educator, I know I've worked a lot with, populations where there's domestic abuse. Is just when you put people in their homes, you take away their jobs, you could not come up with a better recipe for abuse. So for like the first couple of weeks, I was having dreams of like rescuing women and children from violent men. It was just, I just knew that was in the field, that that's just going to be happening.
Right.
I also have a huge heart of compassion for, it sounds strange, but for the abusers, because they are wounded too. They are the screaming example of unintegrated trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just prayed a lot. I do work with the collective field all the time, and that was coming up, so I was working with that. Um, I would say that this specific trauma, trauma in a nutshell, and Peter Levine says this, is having no choice.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about that, that is the root of trauma, is having no choice.
Right. Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
think and so integrating and mitigating a healing trauma is about reclaiming choice,
Mm-hmm.
consciously, physically, mentally, emotionally. Just think of the overriding thing that is happening right now. No choice.
Right.
Stay in your home. You don't get to go to work. You're non-essential. I almost threw an
That's
F-bomb out
rude.
there. What a horrible thing to tell people.
Right.
Just the word isolate is traumatizing. And the way that, and just this whole, I just look at the way that we're being imprinted by and I'm just like, oh my God, just the language that's going around
Mm-hmm.
is traumatizing. So we've all been given no choice. Traumatizing.
Right.
It just is. The other thing that there's just so many layers to this. The other thing is that for most of us, the bad guy, the boogeyman, we can't see it. Most of the people I know, and believe me, I am not saying it's not happening. It's a thing we are all dealing with, but don't know anybody personally who's sick or severely sick, or now, especially at least in the area that I'm in, we've flattened the curve really well, and so we all have this compassion and this fear, and we see the news, but it's not at our door. It's not like a hurricane it's like the hurricane sirens are going off all the time, but the hurricane never really comes, so that's traumatizing.
Have you ever seen the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Oh my God, yes.
Great movie. But we're expecting a pandemic to be that scene of bring out your dead, and it's not like that. It's like the only thing, the only, honestly, and forgive me, but I am fairly privileged, But the big difference for me is I don't get to go out to the happy hour on Friday that I used to, because I work from home. I don't see a lot of this stuff, and you're absolutely right. I don't know anybody personally that has gotten it, been diagnosed with it, except for I think by extension I've heard of 2 people and they recovered.
Well, and so there's all these layers that we could talk about that are definitely traumatizing. Like I look at things like anything that strips away somebody's sense of self, or especially the less self-aware that person is, it throws them into, it's very destabilizing. And when so you tell somebody you don't have a job anymore. And for many people, that takes away their identity.
Right.
Or a big chunk of it, a big chunk of their ego construct just got taken away. And then they're being told what to do is go home and be with your family, who you're probably trying to avoid most of the time.
Which is why your job has become your identity.
So you start stripping that stuff away, and what's right underneath there? All of our trauma patterns, right? And since we've really gotten really good at avoiding those, and so to me, in that is not a condescending finger pointing. To me, that's like an opportunity. So if there's anything that I could share, like in this way, is that if you have the space to do this, to just look at what's coming up for you. Just be with the experience you're having and notice and see if you can just stay with what's actually happening for you. And so like, so a lot of people are familiar with like fight or flight, and that's that, activation of the nervous system. And then there's freeze. Okay. So but what we don't often talk about is the chronic version of those, and freeze then gives way to collapse. And that's, I think, a trauma pattern that's not talked about enough. And then there's also the trauma pattern of fawn, which I don't think gets talked about enough.
No, in fact, I just became aware of that in the last year or so. I've never heard that before. And considering I've been studying and recovering from trauma since the early 90s, that's unusual that I haven't at least heard of it before.
Yeah. And so, and to me, I just look around and you look on social media and you look at these patterns that are playing, and you can see the people in which kind of dominant pattern they go to. You can see the people that just need the information, and they're ones that overnight they've magically become epidemiologists, and they're sharing all the numbers every day as if the rest of us couldn't Google, right? Like, so but that's the compassion piece for that is that desperate need to feel in control. If I have the right information and I'm telling everybody I'm in control and I'm the helper and I don't have to deal with my own panic. So again, trauma pattern, coping mechanism. Then you see the wild pendulum of like conspiracy theories, which is again not wrong. It's bypassing. It's a need to, again, if I'm in control of the narrative, it's all in attempts to find some control. Right. Some people are really triggered and terrified of it brings up the threat of getting sick or of losing a loved one, because we haven't, especially as a culture, we don't deal with our fear of death. Like if you're a person on your spiritual path and on a path of self-awareness, that is such important work to do. I'm a really avid believer in doing your shadow work, and then you got, the love and light people trying to act as if we're going to all float up into the 5th dimension now. And I know I'm sounding like I'm being kind of an ass about it, but it's just, it's, they're all escapes from just being present with the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so much wisdom and so much available to be with. Like, so my trauma pattern that has come up, especially from that experience, is collapse, is paralysis and collapse. And I've been working with this pattern a long time. I know the ways that it shows up in my day-to-day life: procrastination, poor time management, self self-sabotage, like, right.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting is this time has really offered me this opportunity to really be with the subterranean levels of that distrust that I have of the world that can't keep me safe, right?
Mm.
That little
Yeah.
that little
Yeah.
child, I had, my nervous system had to face this thing that no one's coming for me. Why?
Mm-hmm.
This, I have no control,
Yeah.
and I'm about to be annihilated, and I have no control,
Yeah.
and no one's coming, right?
Yeah.
So out of that, I have formulated a very strong sense of resilience, a strong sense of, most people who often describe me as fierce and strong. And I've been working a really long time, though, to melt away some of that armor,
Mm.
so I can get to that little girl again and honor her surrender and her vulnerability.
Right.
And so I've just hardly been able to get myself to do anything. Like,
Mm-hmm.
here I am, a personal trainer. I'm like, is it cocktail hour yet? Like, no, maybe I'll do the laundry tomorrow. Like, I just have, like, because I was working as a trainer, and the gym closed. I can't see clients, so I'm home. My partner works from home. My kids are home, but when those things come up, I try very hard to walk my talk. I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to be with this. Why do I feel so unwilling to? And then you have little spits and starts of, I want to go in and get in conversations and correct people's epidemiology numbers, because I actually do have some training in that. And really what I find myself always trying to do is just, like, one of my phrases, I don't want to tell people what to think, but I want to teach people how to think, because I'm a really big believer in critical thinking.
Yeah.
And questioning the narrative, especially your own,
Mm-hmm.
because they're all programs. They're all, and then just, so it's just, I think that having patience and compassion with ourselves, that it keeps changing, because none of us know how this is going to turn out.
Right.
No one's actually in control,
Right. And
and,
that gets
like,
very difficult for the ones that the trauma response is to create something. What are you going to create? Now, it's like
mm-hmm.
there's nowhere for it to land yet.
Yeah. And mine is create a relationship with your inner landscape.
That it's funny you were talking about all those responses, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's my trauma response? Because
Mm-hmm.
part of my trauma was that I was kidnapped from my mom by my dad and kept in an office trailer for like 2 years, and I had like 6 Manilow albums, a Monkees album, and a Donnie and Marie album to keep me company.
Mm-hmm.
So when all of this hit, I got into my comfort zone. I don't have to go nowhere. I don't have to talk to nobody. And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to sit there and I'm going to play and I'm going to be the MC of the live album. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Exactly.
in my zone here being the MC of
Mm-hmm.
this show, highlighting other people that are doing this amazing work. And I couldn't be busier and I couldn't be happier.
Exactly. Well, I made a joke. I made a meme when this all first started. Because my go-to coping mechanism is self-isolation. Like, that's my jam. Like, and there was a meme going around. It just cracked me up. And it's like, this got this little puppet, and he's got, like, this look on his face. And it says, when you find out that your preferred lifestyle is called quarantine. It's like,
That's awesome.
and I mean, it's not, and I love people, and I definitely self-identify as a introverted extrovert. I don't have, like, social anxiety, but I I do self-isolate. I do, because I get so much information. I do get overwhelmed, and I've learned to manage it. I've had to have a practice really my whole life of just grounding and knowing how to move energy through my body. And and I teach that, and I do that with clients. But
But it's nice sometimes to not have to be doing the work of
Mm-hmm.
managing all of the incoming stuff, to
Mm-hmm.
just, and not to shield yourself against it, because I've
Mm-hmm.
found shields are very brittle and they are
Oh,
not a
I
good
don't.
technique at all.
Nope.
But to just
Mm-hmm.
minimize what's coming at you so that you can, you know,
Mm-hmm.
recharge and strengthen your ability to
Mm-hmm.
deal with it when you have to.
No, I am able to maintain a significant amount of peace
Mm-hmm.
within, like, I'm that person that I call it go into ninja mode when things get, like, I can hold my center.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an extremely important skill to have.
Agreed.
I remember one time asking my therapist, I was like, I had gone back to this because I'd gone through a lot of, it's the number of like really insanely volatile experiences I've had in the last like 7, 8 years is pretty. Anyway, I was going through one and I had reached back out to him, and I navigate things quickly. Like I pull things in. I was like, I asked him straight, I'm like, am I just dissociating? Am I just like, why am I so fine? Like I should. and and he was like, no, he's like, he's like, I see you meet it, you work with it, you integrate it. He's like, you're just really resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me because you can, um, yeah, it just helped me, and it
Well,
helped me,
no,
but
I get that,
to,
because you get to a
yeah.
point where you've gotten some skill and some facility with processing, or,
Mm-hmm.
managing whatever it is, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
get to a point where you're so good at it that there's something new wrong. You shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
this good at this. This is,
Mm-hmm.
why aren't you having breakdowns like normal people? Why aren't,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm saying? You
Yeah.
actually
Mm-hmm.
get so good at processing the energy that it becomes, not effortless, but
Mm-hmm.
close enough to make you
Well,
go, "Am I
it's
missing something?"
right. Well, and really what I teach people, one of the techniques I teach is really, it's called somatic self-inquiry. And it's something, the more you do it, because you literally are growing new neural patterns that will allow you to do this
Mm-hmm.
in the moment, is to just recognize that there's this layer of interpretation that the mind does, but really it's all transient.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just, but we take it so personally.
Mm-hmm.
We take it
Yeah.
so personally. And learning to not do that while watching, you can hold both. This is something that I've actually been working on a piece of writing about this idea that you can watch yourself and have anger arise. You don't have to fix it, and you can watch it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
it's this thing of, if we don't have to choose, and our culture and the world narrative is constantly pushing us into dichotomizing thinking,
Mm-hmm.
good, bad, right, wrong, light, dark, and it's both and all the time.
Yeah.
And when you can make peace with that, and you really let go of having to pick a side,
Mm-hmm.
and you just, I don't know, that's the language I use a lot with clients, is that really what I'm trying to help people do is activate their neuroplasticity around charged memories, charged ideas, charged patterns that are keeping them from enjoying being in joy and contentment.
Yeah. No,
It's kind of,
and I
yeah.
actually, I totally get it, and I
Mm-hmm.
also get the, it's not discomfort, it's a wariness of even approaching the fact that this is not horrible and this is not wonderful. It's a
Mm-hmm.
continuum that has absolutely no emotional charge until you attach to it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Well,
So
and
you
and
can
then
observe
exactly.
it, and
Mm-hmm.
without going, all the way to that end of the spectrum, or all the way to that end of the spectrum, and let it be. And when you can do that, there's more that you can do with it than if you're
Mm-hmm.
inside of one end of the spectrum or the other, the judgment of it.
Right. And one thing I want to touch on just briefly is it's everybody is at a different place with this journey. So one thing that I learned both in working with people's bodies and their health, if you're going to be a facilitator and a practitioner that's trauma informed, and again, I'm going to say this, I am not a therapist. I am not a licensed counselor, trauma therapist. I think the work I do is a very good supplement for people who are doing trauma therapy. Not everybody can use these more, everybody's just in a different place. So somebody who is still in active PTSD, or who has complex PTSD, I am not going to say to them, just close your eyes, and like that's dishonoring of where they're at in that moment. So like I worked with a client as an example who was also working with a therapist, and her therapist, I think mindfulness and meditation and these kind of more alternative modalities are starting to prove themselves in the eyes of science. And so more and more therapists are trying to include them. Great. That's wonderful. But there's so much nuance. Like she was even this woman had such active PTSD that she can't close her eyes in a space she's unfamiliar with. And you're telling her to close her eyes and go inward. Like that's the most unsafe place that exists for this person, is inward.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why they don't go there. So there's so many ways. You have to meet people where they're at. And if that means like, I joke, I'm such an advocate and a huge believer in alternative and holistic modalities, all the things. But if I get hit by a car and my leg is like about to be like, I'm not going to call my acupuncturist. Right?
Fair enough. Absolutely.
I want an ambulance to show up with Western medicine and really good drugs and a surgeon. Right?
Yeah.
So I am not for a second going to just throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of Western medicine and traditional therapies. I think that shames people really unnecessarily. And if for where that person's at in their journey, for them to get from one day to the next that they're taking medication or they're, I am just not going to suggest that these. I just think it's both and. And everybody's journey is different. Everybody's level of self-awareness is different. And like we were saying earlier, like I don't think you have to go digging for it all the time. And trauma has become an identity, and that's another thing. That could be a whole other show. Like I really think we pick up these mantles of chronic disease and all these labels, and then they're limiting ultimately. So I don't know what got me off on that tangent, but I think it's important to honor people where they're at.
Yeah.
And
I think it's a very advanced conversation to be able to have with a person, and they have to have gone through a number of different levels of the recovery ladder, so to speak, up and out of the subterranean levels of feeling, to get to where you can look at it as a spectrum, not as a dichotomy, and where you can value some of the bad things that we would knee-jerk say are bad things and go, okay, but here's the silver linings out of it. I went through a long period in my life where I was still under the effects of a lot of rage, but I was like, I'm going to find the fucking silver lining here. I'm going to rip this cloud inside out if I need to, but I'm going to find it. And yeah, it's a more advanced conversation to be able to look at it objectively.
Well, and some people are still in a place where, like, to me, my response to that is then sometimes you need to sit there and let it rain on you.
Yeah.
You just need to sit there in the lightning storm and let it thunder, lightning, and rain on you and have that experience. Like, and not to always try to find the silver lining immediately. Like that's a spiritual bypass. I see that a lot.
Oh no, I'm not saying immediately.
I'm
saying I was on a mission that I was whatever was going to happen, I was going to, the last thought about it was going to be a positive thought.
Right. And I think that I agree with you. And part of that is that resilience. Like there's this subtle difference between resilience and bypassing, resilience and avoidance. And so there's everything being a spectrum within that. Yeah. Some people are still really in the space where they just need to keep telling their story. And that's the place where I'm not the best practitioner for that person. I am the practitioner for the person who is at a point, the daunting place, I would say, of taking full responsibility for themselves
Mm-hmm.
and really claiming their sovereignty. And I believe so strongly that we all just need to be witnessed. And this is something that in Peter Levine's work that helped me understand is like the people who stay stuck in trauma loops is there's no exit ramp. And when they come spit, they never were held in the exit ramp and witnessed and helped to be brought back, in. And so like when we started doing it, like that was something I had to do for myself because I had no help. Like my parents loved me and they knew something had happened, but there was no awareness. There was no skill for like the fact that it took me a while to get over the fact that they had never told me. I was pissed. I was like, what? Like that was one layer of my work, that I had to work with was the anger I had towards my mom,
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is like some people are just still in that loop, and to just tell them to stop telling their story. And I sometimes have that I hate I have a lot of resistance to wallowing in my shit. Like to me, there's like, you go into it, you like roll your sleeves up and you get in there and you do your thing. But I don't want to roll around in it indefinitely and make it, and roll around in my victimhood. Like I actually got asked to leave a sexual assault survivors group once because I refused to self-identify as a survivor. I'm like, that's not who I am. It's a thing that happened to me, but see the stubbornness in my, I'm just so, we all got to meet ourselves where we're at. And what I try to do, that's why I like I use the word soul midwife or midwifery or being a doula, because I don't think we actually heal other people. I think that we hold a space for them to heal themselves. Yeah. And so what I do with what I'm able to tap into is just to try to hold that and reflect back to them the wholeness that they already are, so that they can take a step out of that loop and start to weave a new understanding and a new relationship with that loop. And that's just not, it just has to be, it's hard, right. It's hard to take full responsibility, especially if you still feel like you want to hold somebody else accountable and they haven't been held accountable. It's really dicey.
Excuse me. Well, that is phenomenal. I have to bring to your attention that I have gotten lost in your conversation for a full hour now. And I really want to take a moment to encourage everybody who's been watching this and commenting on Facebook. Thank you so much for your comments. Here's the deal. I want you to go onto Facebook and search for Living the Spiral Path. That will bring up Molly's Facebook page. If you haven't already, I want you to like that page. And then I want you to message Molly with the word spotlight and your name. And then she will get back to you as soon as she's available to schedule your free 20-minute consultation. Does that work for you? Good. Go do it now. And Molly and I are going to just sit here and talk for another hour, I think.
I got nowhere to be.
Well, unfortunately, I do have other meetings that I have to do today, so as much as I would love to do that, I am joking. We do need to kind of sign it off here. Yeah. But I want to have you back again, whether we do it on the Corona Spotlight or another show container. I would love to talk to you more about this because I really, really love the perspective and the altitude from which you do your work. And thank you so much for being such an important.
And we didn't even talk about my book.
I know. Oh my God. Yes. Please,
that's a whole other. That's like I said. That's a whole other conversation because it's. It seems separate. It seems like this separate thing, but it's actually not.
No,
ceremonial
it's not.
is a profound and important template for healing individual and collective trauma. So I'll just drop that seed there.
Awesome. Yes, we definitely need to do something about that. We will do something about that. I'll be in touch with you. All right?
That sounds wonderful.
Sounds good. Now, last thing. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience today?
Mostly since this was about what's going on right now, that we're all in a shared individual experience. And if I can encourage anything, it's just to invite you to deeply have your experience and really look at what's coming up. Look how you're managing, remember that your children, this is unknown territory. And the human ego and psyche does not like the unknown. It does not like the unknown, but I would encourage you to open to it because that's where magic happens. That's where we accept that it's always unknown. We have far less control than we like to think. So embrace it and be curious. Be curious about what's coming up for you personally.
Beautiful.
And,
thank you
and
so
gentle.
much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, Facebook, have an absolutely wonderful day. We'll see you again soon. When you open yourself up to actual energy work, makes that recovery progress so much faster. That recovery is possible. You do not have to live as a victim until your last days. You have unbelievable strength, and I know that because you're still here. Do you want to create something completely unrecognizable with your life? I can show you how.